is the Assistant Vice President of the National Immigration Forum, and she has been in the immigration space for over 10 years. And so we are so lucky to have her here tonight. Amy Chika heard her at an event several months ago and said we really need to get her in here, especially with what we have going on in our country right now. So Christy, thank you so much for being here, and a warm welcome.
It is a privilege to be here and just an honor. I've never been to a meeting of the League of Women Voters, but I appreciate the work you do. Voting rights and the redistricting work is all so important. So for me, it's a privilege. I come from the very far distance of Stowe, Ohio, next door. So I'll tell you a little bit about my backstory, and then we'll have a little conversation, and then I'll eventually tell you a little bit about the forum, and I'll let you know about slides later. We'll do that toward the end. And then I'll open it up for questions, and all questions are okay, so that's how I feel in any setting. So feel free to save your questions for the end. So I grew up in Stowe, went to Miami, moved to England when I was 22 and lived there for a gap decade. And for 10 years, I did campus ministry. I worked for a missionary organization, and I was really good at talking to college students about Jesus over beer and halal chicken. So how I ended up here has been a really interesting story of God. But a decade ago, my home church, a really large church in the area, asked me to come home and help them start a refugee ministry, and I said I have zero business doing that. I work with college students, none of them are refugees. I have never even done a service trip of any sorts, and these are people who have fled war, and I have no experience working with folks with that kind of trauma. And so they begged and pleaded, and they finally said, we're a white suburban church, please help us. You've been to Afghanistan and you've worked with lots of people cross-culturally, and we need help with that. And so I finally agreed very tentatively, knowing there was so much I didn't know. And so right away put ourselves under local refugee resettlement organizations, worked with World Relief, which was open at the time, a little bit with the International Institute of Akron, with Urban Vision, went to people who were in the neighborhood where a lot of immigrants in Akron were living and said, what is actually needed? Talked to immigrant church leaders, sat with Nepali pastors, got to learn. And we ended up starting an English program for adults in North Hill, partnered with resettlement agencies. And I thought a lot of my only 2 years in America, I was going to definitely go back to England, I had just gotten my British citizenship, was going to be helping folks with the cross-cultural element. It's hard. How do you talk to somebody who don't share the same language? And how do we make sure folks from America are helping and not hurting? We could come up with awfully interesting ideas on ways to help people. And I would receive at the church sometimes enormous amounts of bags in 1 week. And my worst set of bag weeks was somebody left all of these loose light bulbs in a bag at the church labeled Christy for refugees. And I was like, well, they're all broken. Why did you do that? So we were trying to think through, what do people actually need? They need someone who's going to commit to a long-term friendship and teach them how to drive. That's hard. And teach folks how to deal with their taxes. And they don't need short, little pithy friendships. They've lost most of their friends and family through a war or some other traumatic thing abroad. So how do we prepare people to sit with people for the long haul? And so that's what I thought I was going to do. But almost immediately, the Syrian refugee crisis kind of hit the fan globally. And here, politicians found it very convenient to make people afraid. And so lots of things were told about Syrians that were not true, including some of the terror attacks that were experienced in France were done by Syrian refugees, and they weren't. We knew their names. They were Belgian and French citizens who had not come as refugees to the country. And so these sticky stories had two things. They lodged fear in so many people's hearts, and they made it really hard for us to look at our new neighbors who might come from a different culture or faith with generosity and with love, and to move towards people. And so my one really kind of eye-catching moment was I was in this, one of the first big events we ran, and it was 500 women had just left Bible study, and we had a former refugee share her story of 25 years in a refugee camp, and she was a Christian who had come from a Buddhist background and became a Christian in her refugee camp. And somebody stood up and began shouting at her in the middle of this meeting how terrible it was that refugees were coming, and that she was afraid of Sharia law coming from Dearborn, Michigan. And Dearborn is not under Sharia law, they're under local US law. And this woman wasn't Muslim. And so it was like two types of falsehoods. And that was the journey that got me thinking, how do we change the culture, people's perceptions, and then how do we actually change? The more I start to relate with refugees, which is a legal program, they come through the State Department, they were brought here by the US government, vetted abroad. But I started meeting immigrants of other backgrounds who had different stories, and I just started bumping into mess after mess of our broken immigration system. And my pathway to British citizenship was really easy. I had 5 years in the country straight, and then I got the British version of the green card. I took the test. I do with British people what most immigrants could do with Americans, which is let's play a pop quiz about things I know about your country that you don't know because I passed your citizenship test. And then a year after that, I was eligible for citizenship. So I sat on it for a couple years, but mine was a very easy process. And then I start looking at our laws going, are you telling me that if somebody immigrates here from Mexico and then gets a job and goes through the 7 to 8 to 10 to 12, it's not clear, years to become a citizen, and then says, I'd like to bring my brother over, or my mother, maybe they were a college student, and they went through our universities, and they got a degree, and they got an H-1B, and they got sponsored later, and so this huge process, and I want to bring my mother over. Right now, we're processing people from Mexico who are coming through that family reunification from almost 20 years ago. And so when I started bumping into things like this, or bumping into folks who came here as children, most of them through undocumented means, like their families did not lawfully enter the country. Some, their parents did come on visas, and then mistakes happened with the paperwork, and the child became undocumented, but the parents were legal. And we've been working in Congress, Senator Durbin, since 2001 to try to find a pathway for this group of folks called Dreamers, and we still don't have a permanent legal status for them. So when I started learning these things, I was like, this is terrible. So let's look at where we are today. So you may have heard comments like this: immigrants are polluting the blood of the country. They're flooding our shores from asylums and prisons abroad. They bring crime and disease, and they're going to ruin America. These sound familiar? Did they sound familiar to you? They're actually statements from the 1920s. History has echoes. And in the 1920s, there was this huge anti-immigrant backlash to the time that we kind of memorialize as the great days of immigration. We think of the Statue of Liberty and all the people that came on boats and went to Ellis Island, and that made a lot of people really angry. And there was a backlash against people who were Polish or Italian or Jewish, Hungarian, and this was said about them in the country. So does anybody have one of those ethnic backgrounds in the country? I don't. I'm like a Northern European. We've got some people of Italian descent, Polish, Eastern European, Jewish. I see your hands. I'm really grateful you're here because I drive around Cleveland and I've got great Italian food. I go into different neighborhoods and I can get amazing bagels. I think of people who have become doctors and lawyers and even US senators who that's their family story. They came during that great immigration period between the 1880s and the 1920s. And in the 1920s, that rhetoric was national. Henry Ford, my dad was a Ford worker. Henry Ford used to put a little magazine in all the Fords sold that had anti-Semitic cartoons, the same kind of cartoons that were used by Hitler in Germany, saying terrible things about Jewish immigrants. And the Reed-Johnson Amendment gets passed. So what you should know about this, you don't need to know the name, is that it was a racial quotas act. And we really didn't like all these groups of people who are ruining the country by their new religions, those Catholics, and their different ethnicities. And so we won't actually do PowerPoint for a bit, so you're okay. So this gets passed, and what it did was it closed the door on immigration for about 40 years. And one of the more famous stories is that in 1939, a boat of Jewish people are fleeing what was coming to Europe and what had already started. And they got to the shores of Florida and they got turned back based on you don't fit into our racial quotas. Because what we had done when we wrote the Reed-Johnson Amendment was we went back 30 years to the census of 1890, before these groups had come in, and said we want to allow 2% of every ethnicity that was in the US in the 1890s, and that's the only people we'll allow. So my people, I'm English, Swedish, I'm like Northern European, very waspy, a little bit of Dutch, not very much, just my last name. We were allowed in the country, but if you had Italian immigrants, I bet they came before 1920, and they didn't come after that because that's what we did, we closed our doors. And there were dire consequences to it. There's some even say, and this is not agreed by all economists, but some even say that the Great Depression was worsened by us closing the door to people, because people, I'll quote some of my favorite libertarians, equal prosperity. People have a give and take on the economy, and they don't just take jobs, they create jobs. And the more you kind of drive that labor pool, it actually can have a big effect on the economy. So, what do we do about these fears today? One is we can be honest about the real challenges in our immigration system. And so that can be hard. So I would love lots of people to come from all over the world. And I have, if you're in my job, a friend of a friend of a friend always calls you and wants to like sneak through the border or come through the Darien Gap, or I want my friend to come. Yes, I voted for somebody who doesn't want any immigrants to come 3 times, but I want my friend to come through Mexico across the border. And I always tell them, don't do that. That's terrible, that's dangerous. It could cause great harm to your family. But we do need to be honest with the fears that are out there. So folks saw the last few years, the highest amount of people come through our border in 20 years. It was higher than the peak. So the peak was 2000, and that was about 2 million people. I think we were about 2.3 million people over the last year. And so when people see those high numbers and cities feel the pressure on resources or what to do with people or housing, it's created a backlash. And so I even saw friends who I thought, they love immigrants. I have a friend in New York, he speaks 7 languages. He started getting really angry about all the Venezuelan asylum seekers who came there and were taking the place of homeless people in hotels. And there's some things about New York laws and who gets shelter and who doesn't that you can fight with your local government. But I started seeing the tone on folks with immigration being such a hotbed over it played into people's fears. Some were lied about. So in Springfield, Ohio, we had a lot of lies told about our Haitian neighbors. And they came here lawfully through a temporary protected status program. They were rebuilding Springfield that had really a drought of workers leave, and people would graduate and go, I don't want to stay in this small town, I want to go somewhere to a bigger city. And so Haitians were filling roles and allowing that economy to prosper. Empty homes were getting bought up again. It was increasing the tax base. But there were struggles there. So there were struggles. We took a long time in Ohio for Haitian Creole to be on our driving test. People are going to go to work whether they have a license or not, and so there were accidents, there were folks who didn't learn the laws properly. So there's things that we have to do as a community when we're having a new population to deal with cross-cultural understandings of one another. We have to help folks integrate and be able to participate in the system, and sometimes that's a friendship locally and teaching someone, here's how we do things around here. And other times it's fixing a systemic thing like making sure the Ohio driver's license has all the languages that we name on it. And so that created some struggles in the community that got taken up by political actors who brought death threats to the community. And now we're dealing with the fact that folks who have come here from Haiti lawfully on TPS have had TPS revoked, and that's currently being fought a little bit in the courts right now. So the question is will the Trump administration win or the courts win, and will they be deported or not? So how do we face the challenges that immigration brings, which is sometimes fear, sometimes struggles, confusion, sometimes the shortages of resources, but also it creates resources, it creates jobs, it creates what our country is. We are a country of immigrants. How do we deal with these two tensions? The fear on one hand and the opportunity on the other. And so I'll tell you a little bit about how we work at the National Immigration Forum. Renee will boom me some slides. So we've been around for a little over 40 years, and our vision is to create a 21st century immigration system that helps new Americans gain opportunities, skills, status they need to realize their full potential. And we bring together conservative and moderate faith, law enforcement, and business, and actually now national security leaders, to weigh in on media, policymakers, and really come to a consensus on how do we get to practical, common sense immigration and citizenship services, policies, and ultimately immigration reform. I love that we always use the phrase that we want to be a nation of laws and a nation of grace. So our areas of focus for a long time have been dreamers, folks I mentioned earlier, those on TPS or temporary protected status, giving them more security to their statuses. There's no pathway to green cards for those folks. There's no pathway to citizenship. Create a secure, humane, and orderly border. The cartels are an evil business, lots of evil businesses, and they do their business on the back of human suffering, and it causes migrants to suffer, it causes Americans to suffer, and so how do we have really serious, orderly border systems to know who's coming into the country? That's a fair thing. We want to reform the legal workforce, so we want to deal with the fact that right now, we don't have the visas that meet the job demands, and we've got a tension of that in different industries. So the farming industry for years has said how many visas that they are short of. We want to reform what is needed and look at the labor force and say, how do we make sure employers can access Americans for their jobs, and then how do we make sure if there's not enough Americans that immigrants can fit that? We want to welcome those fleeing persecution. So that is one of the values of America, and it's on our Statue of Liberty. And so many of us have family stories that if we weren't economically moving here, a lot of folks were fleeing some sort of persecution in their former country. And a lot of European countries, that's how we were fleeing persecution. But then as conflict has moved around the world, we have folks from around the world. And in our communities in the area, we have folks who have fled the war in Afghanistan, they have fled Iraq, they were partners to our American military. We have folks who have fled the Syrian war, who were pharmacists, who suddenly lost everything because of the Civil War. And so how do we be a place for those who have fled? A good friend of mine comes from Congo. He now is studying nursing. He got his first degree at Kent in politics. He's getting a nursing degree. He's in the U.S. National Guard. And his story was being a childhood refugee fleeing the Congolese conflicts into neighboring Uganda. And we've been friends now for about 10 years, and he's part of my family practically. We want to see pathways to citizenship. For those particularly that we evacuated 4 years ago. So 4 years have gone by, and we brought all these folks out and we gave them a new pathway to citizenship. And so that is quite troubling. And then broader immigration reforms. So we work with a bunch of initiatives, some within our organization and some are outside with coalitions. So the last 6 years before I took this role, I worked on the Bible's Badges in Business initiative. And so we worked with grasstops leaders, so pastors, police chiefs, business owners, and we would mobilize them towards lobbying Congress for immigration reform. I also had the privilege of sitting in the middle of Pennsylvania or in the middle of Medina, Ohio, or in the middle of some small town in Indiana and talking to a group of Chamber of Commerce folks or talking to a group of pastors and answering sticky questions around immigration. Sometimes they knew that we needed to fix our immigration system and they wanted to see our values lived out, that we would welcome those fleeing terrible things, and that we'd also have reforms to fix what's broken. And we would help them work with their community that maybe was having harder questions and they were a little bit stuck. And so, lots of conversations and events, and giving people a space to actually talk about those things. Right now, it's so hard to talk about things that feel controversial. We'll feel quite vulnerable to say, I have a question that I feel like people are going to yell at me about. So we really work in the field to create a lot of space for people to get their questions answered and to say sometimes there aren't easy answers, to be honest about that too. We've got 2 programs for women, evangelical women, called Women of Welcome and We Choose Welcome, and they're doing incredible work. And then we've got an evangelical immigration table. It's a coalition of different Christian evangelical, particularly organizations. The Law Enforcement Immigration Task Force has police chiefs and sheriffs from around the country who've opted to be a part of this coalition who say, our communities are safer when immigrants trust their local police to report crime. And if immigrants think that the local police's job is to check their visa or their green card or to look for their documentation, even if they're a US citizen, they're going to not trust the local police, and they're not going to report the break-in, and they're not going to report the abusive husband, and they're not going to report the violent incident that happened to them. And then that offender can go and do that to more people. So with this incredible group of law enforcement leaders who believe in the separation of powers, they believe in a federalist system, and they say our job is to make sure our communities are safer, and so they're trying to educate folks on those principles because they want their immigrant communities to trust them and to report crime, and they want to work together with them. And the last one, this is our newest coalition, is the Council on National Security and Immigration, and it's made of folks who used to work for INS, they used to work for the Department of Homeland Security, I think we have some CIA in there, lots of national security folks who really understand what it means to keep America's borders safe, and they also believe in the value of immigrants. All right, I will go back to finishing up this and then give you guys a few minutes to talk. So I mentioned all the fears that we have, and we're in this tension where we're also trying to tell people the values, but really a lot's happening. We're having masked agents arrest people who don't have identification. It's a lot of pressure. So how do we change that? There are a couple things that I think we could do to address fear and othering and to also affect the system. The real big picture that we've needed forever and ever is we need Congress to pass laws. We need to pass immigration reform. So a lot of the changes in immigration that have happened this year, and there's been a lot, they're executive orders, which means they'll get changed in the next administration, whoever takes power. So it's a stroke of a pen. But they're causing a lot of disruption, and they're affecting a lot of lives, some at a very high cost. So we really need to, and this is the one that I find hardest for folks to talk about because I think we're tired. We all make the phone calls to our congressional members, but I was telling folks at my table, my job is like Sisyphus pushing that boulder up the hill. Every day it rolls back down, we catch it, we push it up again, but we need to continually, persistently connect with our congressional members. We need to tell them better stories. We need to bring in our friends that it affects. We need to bring in unusual people they wouldn't think to come in and talk. We need to befriend our local police chief or our local whomever and go, I want you to come with me to the meeting with Senator Moreno's office, and we're going to work on this together. So we need complex partnerships to really push and say, hey, we're uniting together that we don't like this. This is not our values, and we want this. 80% of Americans want secure borders, and they also want to see changes to the immigration system that treat immigrants with dignity and respect, and that we fix long-term immigrant statuses, and that it meets the needs of American workforce. But it's not what it sounds like in the news. So the second part, so we need Congress to work, which means we have to keep pestering them. The second part is we need to build bridges, and that's really hard, because right now it's so easy to move into a little echo chamber, sometimes echo chambers of echo chambers, and it's really hard to believe the best. I am a conservative, evangelical, Christian woman who did not vote for Trump 3 times, and I need to build bridges even in my own community. It's really challenging to still say, I believe the best in you, I want to bring you to have a better conversation about this, or how can we work on this together? And then I need to work with people who are not my community in other spaces. So that is hard, and that requires us to have some discipline, to believe the best in people, to control our tongues sometimes, and to continually think, I'll like write things, say things, be snappy, and then go pause. How do I treat someone with dignity? How do I reach out? How do I build a bridge? How do I move this from online or a text message to come to my house for dinner? So we need face-to-face, where we're talking and we're getting stuff out on the table and treating one another with dignity and respect. And this is just, it's talking about immigration. Yes, I'm okay with shouting during any talk. But he agrees. I mean, but we also need this with all the other subjects that we are so stuck about, is how do we treat one another as fellow Americans and not as the other or they or the enemy. And so that's a practice, join me, a spiritual practice for us to work on that. So we pester Congress. We personally take responsibility to build bridges. And the third is how do we get to a more orderly and humane immigration system, is we need to change the culture of fear and disinformation. I'll say, all three of those are really hard, really hard. So all day long, I hear stories of what people think is true about immigration, and it is not true. We, my friends and I at the National Immigration Forum, and all of those who are hanging out in the middle trying to get to immigration reform, we have failed. We have failed the rhetorical war. The folks who want to tell you that Springfield folks are eating dogs and cats won. The folks who want to tell you that it's all criminals coming across the border have won. And so we need to go back to, how do I keep having those one-to-one conversations? How do I also influence and write op-eds that are not screaming and shouting? How do I write an op-ed in a way that can be received by somebody who thinks differently than me? So how am I still inviting people to the table? But continuing to tell the truth. So we have to tell the truth right now. I love to have dinner parties where I put people who don't know each other together. It's like one of my favorite social experiments. I've done 2 in the last month. One was a barbecue and one was a dinner party. And so I look for those opportunities, and in those spaces, I'm hoping they tell each other true stories that they can learn. And so they're really hard right now, but our work with the immigration, if you are interested in hearing more true stories about immigration, I should have put a QR code up there. I did not. I'll send y'all something and you can send it out. But we have updates that you can hear. So the Forum Daily, every day, we send out like a sweep of immigration news. So if you want to have your inbox get something every day from us, you can sign up for that. But honestly, they're beautiful and hard. It's a clip, it's a short summary, and then you can find the ones you want. And if you don't like us or get sick of emails, we're very easy to unsubscribe from. So the Forum Daily does that. Then the next one we have is I'm now 44 and I need glasses. Oh, that's so terrible, I'm squinting. The Legislative Bulletin should be next on that list. So if you're really nerdy and you want to read the whole immigration policy and what's coming out of Congress, every Friday, it's usually our friend Arturo, but one of our policy heads writes an incredible brief of the week of everything that's come out, and it's really long. So there's so many changes to actual bills being proposed in Congress, or little policy changes, or little tweaks to a rule, maybe by DHS or ICE. And so if you want to follow that, the Legislative Bulletin, I'll say that's for your really geeky folks. And then the first one, I got these out of order because I can't read that small print, is Forum Updates. And so the Forum Daily is our kind of daily news sweep, Legislative Bulletin, High-End Nerds. And then the Forum Updates, we send those less frequently, but we'll tell you for opportunities to do advocacy, one of our cute little links that you can contact your Congress member through them. And so we do that. So feel free to help friends who are having hard conversations and you think maybe they don't have the whole story on immigration. I love to talk to folks like that. So also feel free, if you want to host a dinner party, I'll come hang out at your dinner party if you cook with me. And so think of lots of ways of how do we help each other have more dignified, true stories. And we need that to happen, not just through the National Immigration Forum, that needs to happen all over the country to really change what we understand is true. And I'll say immigration's hard. I work in this space, and I'll say it's so complicated. So if we talk about the border, I work in this space, and to say out loud, so if you cross the border between ports of entry, that's unlawful, but if you come to a port of entry and ask for asylum, that's lawful. And not all people who ask for asylum are eligible for it, but there's now like 4 million people backlogged in our asylum system because nobody's fixed that for a long time. And we've kind of failed on foreign policy because there's a global refugee crisis that has doubled in 10 years, and we could have been working around the world to address that, but nobody did for the last couple administrations. And if people come across the border during the Biden administration, the first 2 years, he gave them humanitarian parole, which is lawful but not permanent. And then he closed it last summer, so then you couldn't get it. And then the Trump administration took away all of that, and the border is closed. That's hard, and I bet none of y'all followed that because that was just a lot of stuff. And to say the U.S. is the one that globally codified asylum laws. So asylum laws exist because of us. We pushed for them to exist in World War II, and the only way you can get asylum is to cross a border into the US. You can't get it from somewhere else. That's really hard, and then everybody says that if you cross the border, you're illegal. And everyone's like, did I follow that? At what point you're illegal and not legal? And then not everyone qualifies. So that is a really hard, I said that mess of words to say it's hard for us to have these conversations, but you don't need to know everything about asylum law or the border to hold on to a couple things. We can be a nation of laws and a nation of grace, and all of us want to see a working immigration system. I think whatever party you belong to, whatever age you are, whatever part of the corner of the country you're from, we want things to work. We're good at things not working. And we also want people, human beings, I'll say from my theology, people made in the image of God, to be treated with dignity and respect. And because we have those two things in common, people don't need to get in the weeds about all the policies. They can do the three things of they can advocate with their elected officials, particularly Congress. It's their job to fix it. And if it's not fixed, it's not the president, it's not the governor, it's not your local person here or there. We have to get Congress to do it. We can work at building those bridges, and we can work at changing the culture of disinformation by making sure we're informed and then helping people have those better conversations gently. And I know everything I said there is really hard. So I'm gonna finish with one of my favorite pastor's quotes. His name is Dr. Reverend Russell Moore. He is a leading conservative pastor nationally. He's actually the executive director of the magazine Christianity Today now. And he said in the last couple of years, welcoming the stranger is not just an act of charity, but a testimony to the values we claim as a nation. Our future prosperity and moral character depend on it. So the US, we have two visions of immigration, and they're competing. One is fear and exclusion, and the other is opportunity and renewal. I think that history and the data show which one produces a stronger America. So I invite you guys to join me in having those tough conversations and making those calls so we can get there. Thanks. Now, how do we do Q&A? Just pop up hands?
I have a microphone. Oh, it is working. Okay.
Renee's got the microphone.
I'm thinking of a couple of immigrant populations locally, in particular the Mexican migrants in Hartville, in the agricultural areas, and also the couple of Asian groups in northern Akron. Are there things that we here could do to assist those populations?
It's a great question. So I'll tell you where I'm ignorant and what I know officially. So 10 years ago, 8 years ago, 7 years ago, I worked much closely, particularly with the North Akron immigrants from a few different Asian countries. Now I feel quite distant. I work nationally. I'm drowning in programs nationally and trying to make our constituencies bigger. I would say a great thing to do, so there's something called the Hartville Migrant Ministry that I know operates in that area. I'd contact them and say, hey, we would love to know what are practical things folks could use on the ground. I have not heard of any raids happening there, and I would try to keep on top of things, but again, I get so much news I might miss stuff. But one, I know immigrants in the migrant community often need legal representation. They also, if you speak Spanish, I know that they have like English classes down there, and they have like homework assistance for kids that I know from like distant years when I was down there. And so, volunteering down there and being able to serve the community, like finding out what do they need and how do we serve. There have been a lot of ICE agents in North Akron, and some of them mostly have gone, like we have actually an undocumented population in Akron from Central America. So I know there have been folks picked up there. So again, there's like legal services that are needed. But I'd say another great thing is to, I'll send out some resources actually. I'll follow up with an email to Amy and she can forward to you. So there are some either immigrant church leaders, so the Nepalis, there's loads of Nepali churches in Akron, the Karen, the same thing, they're from Burma. The International Institute of Akron, Madhu is one of my good friends who directs that. We walk our dogs together. But the International Institute, I know could always use like volunteers or funding. The immigrant church leaders, they often need different things that you might not expect. Like it might be, if you're a finance person, like maybe we need someone to come and do tutorials on tax day. And so the Asian population in North Hill, most of them have pathways to green cards, pathways to citizenship. So there's also opportunities to volunteer and study citizenship with folks, things like that. So Crossings is a ministry in Akron, and I don't think you have to be a Christian to be a part of it. And they do English classes and they do citizenship classes. I think the International Institute is still running citizenship classes. And so those are some like relational ways you could serve. And then I'll get a handful of the Nepali and Karen pastors on an email, and I'll send it to Amy and she can send that out. And I'll ask them and say, hey, what are some local needs? Unfortunately, in my work, I've like lost touch with local as much as I would prefer because of time. But it's a great question, really important. Anyone else? Yes.
Still in the show, our sheriff, county commissioners, does anybody have an update on that?
Okay, and I learned this actually through Ann Reed, so maybe you can say more. Dave Yost issued an opinion, right, that the sheriff on his own couldn't have an agreement with ICE or with Homeland Security unless it was approved by the county commissioners.
I did not know Yo said that. That's good news.
Am I right on that? And I wonder if there's any update. Is that where it stands? I just looked at the county commissioner's agenda, and it wasn't on there.
Does anyone know the sheriff? Because I think if y'all don't know him, someone needs to meet him. But the stuff on, I think that's great to find out about if it's on the county commissioner, and tell them that you don't want them to approve. Use your voices there locally. The other is if y'all can call your sheriff and say, you know it's going to increase crime in our community. Because statistically, that's the reality. I'll throw that in the email too. I'll say crime, I'll just make notes. Or I'm going to forget all the things I'm going to say. So even that advocacy, he might not know. He might think that's how he's being tough on crime. Or he might just want to get in the papers. But if he heard from his constituents that the statistics are against it reducing crime.
As far as I know, the Orange County Sheriff has pretty much stated that he doesn't care what Yost says. He doesn't care what the commissioner said, and he doesn't care what the constituents say. In fact, he just started a YouTube channel. Within 15 minutes, comments were turned off.
Wow, that's disappointing. Somebody needs to run for sheriff. I mean, that's. Can I say that? Are we allowed to say that?
I did.
Yes, sir.
We're working on it.
You seem to be, oh, sorry. You seem to be, correct me if I'm wrong, advocating for civil conversations with people we know to try and persuade them.
Yeah, it's so important. It's so
more
hard.
recently. So today Lauren Boebert, Congresswoman, told Congresswoman Ilhan Omar to go back to Somalia where she belongs. And a lot of people listened to that sort of comment. At the same time, Jimmy Kimmel was just pulled off of ABC because of comments he made about Charlie Kirk. So how do you have a civil conversation with the people who believe those things? That to criticize what happened last week in any other way than martyrdom is wrong, you're wrong, and you should go back to where you came from. In my case, I guess I'd have to go back to Ireland about 1880. How do you have civil? How would you recommend if your neighbor is one of those, Newsmax or Fox following folks who believe all that stuff? How do you have a civil conversation?
Slowly. I'll say, I'm going to give you an answer, but just to raise my hand and say, I am as muddling through this as you are. We're in really unusual times. And the U.S. has been through unusual times before, but there's a disconnect that one person we have some sort, I hate the word cancel culture, one person we cancel for their opinion and the other can say something egregiously rude. That's really hard that there's not a discipline. I think, and I might be wrong, but my commitment is we have to live with dignity, and it starts with me. which means I'm gonna be disciplined about my language, even if you're not. But I'm also going to speak up and try in a disciplined way. So I'm gonna try in a disciplined way to challenge you when there's that like disconnect. And also I think sometimes it comes through asking questions. So I find I have a lot of strong opinions. If I just point out, I used to think if I could just point out the logic in every situation, surely everyone will follow my logic, right? It's correct. It doesn't work in way too many situations. And I think some of it is because people have gotten their identities around. Well, Lauren Boebert is this identity and I identify with her, therefore if I disagree with her, it's my own identity. And so one is we need to get our identities out of lots of stuff. Our partisanship, our favorite celebrity, our favorite talk show host. I have to work at getting my identities out of the people I like as much as the people I don't like. Because I can't tell that person not to find their identity in Lauren's tribe if I have my identity stuck in somebody else's tribe. So I think some of it is an introspection of ourselves. Some of it is approaching that conversation if you can. So, and I'll say, I could tell you all kinds of conversations I've blown up. So just to confess that there, I've blown up things terribly. And I can be quick on the keyboard. And a cousin of mine, we're not, are we still filming? I won't tell the story. You know, I've got experience it, but I'd say if you can try to get someone in person or on the phone, so we need to just do less keyboard warring. No one ever got changed by keyboards. If it's possible, so that means we're working in a smaller circle often. Like I can offer total stranger. I've had one total stranger take me up on it and we had a phone conversation. But that was fascinating. It was somebody who, do you guys know about this crazy, oh that's another story. I got a text message from the Awaken America tour, which was being run by General Flynn. And it was basically a Christian nationalist tour that I tried to visit because it was coming to Canton, and then I found out how much it cost, and I was like, that's crazy, I just want to go watch. And I started getting text messages, and I just texted back one of the people, and I argued with him a little bit, and I was like, I'll talk to you on the phone, and then he called me, and so we had like an hour conversation. So sometimes it's strangers, very rarely, but I'd say it'll mean your circle's smaller. So it's you talking to your aunt or your son or your brother or your next door neighbor saying, hey, come for dinner, come for a beer. And my temptation is logic, but I would actually move towards questions like, why do you like so-and-so so much? Like what makes you defend them? Like tell me how you got to where you're at about this. Like, why does that feel, you know, and I would ask open-ended questions and really work on tone. So we can all ask questions where we sound like we're jerks. And so that's hard, it's really hard, and it means everything's slower. It means I'm not reaching the world, I'm having one conversation with my brother or my cousin or something. And I think those question-asking moments are the way there, but it's hard, and I don't know if it'll win everyone. Yep, let's interact.
Made me think of something. Benjamin Franklin, in his autobiography, goes into a great deal about how he learned and practiced the Socratic method, and he discovered the best way to influence people, and who could influence people better than Benjamin Franklin, was using
all of us.
just asking questions to get people to think the way he thinks, just by asking the right questions. But he had to study it for years.
Yeah, and I think some of it is it's being curious and not trying to think of our answer in our head during that time. So if you're curious and you ask the question and then you sit and listen to their real answer, because you might need to ask them a follow-up question. And if you're having that counter-argument process while they're talking, you're not fully listening, you can't be present. I see myself talking with my hands. You can't be fully present. So that's a theory, and I'll say it drives me nuts that we're in this spot where there's such a disconnect, and I'm like, how are we firing this person and not that person, or getting them to apologize and not them? Like, I think it's crazy making, but I can't affect the vibe going on with our whole culture right now. I can be very disciplined about myself, and then hope and pray that lots of other people take up that discipline, and then if somebody from a different corner of the universe in worldview or political belief shows an ounce of that, praise them. We want to be on each other's teams, even if we disagree on 95% of the policies. So I think that is some of how we'll get there, while we're all like going through the dark on this. I mean, there's authoritarian things happening right now when it comes to our public communications in lots of ways, and I think that theory is correct while it's been untested in a major way. Like, it's my little sphere, you know?
Thank you.
Two follow-ups on your recent, just immediately preceding remark about Michael Flynn doing his grand tour. He was here in Portage County last year. He did a fundraiser for our sheriff, Bruce Zukowski. So that's what we get to deal with here, as far as our sheriff is concerned. But more importantly, it was brought to our attention that Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost did issue a Attorney General's opinion just a couple of weeks ago. And I have it here, August 26th. Attorney General Opinion 2025-015. The Board of County Commissioners may enter into an agreement with federal immigration authorities on behalf of the sheriff to detain aliens subject to removal in the county jail. The sheriff does not have independent contracting authority for this purpose. So the person who brought this up is correct. The sheriff can't do it for commissioners.
One more question.
I was wondering, please, if you could just describe what the paths to citizenship would be for students graduating, that they had a student visa that's expired now.
It's expired.
Graduate, and what is the next step? Is there a step, or do they need to go home?
So I will say I'm not an immigration lawyer. I can nerd out on all the policy, and as soon as we get an immigration law, I'm like really, really thin on the ground. I think if it has expired, they need to go home. If it's about to expire, they need to go right to an immigration lawyer's office and talk to them. So the workforce visas, there's been so many changes, and we don't focus on international students in my organization, so that transition into the workforce, it's really hard. I mean, you have to find a company to sponsor you. So I would say, so I don't say anything that gets them in trouble. If it's expired, they probably need to leave, because they don't have a valid visa. If it's not expired, I would go see an immigration lawyer who specializes in employment or student visa. So if they're at Kent, Akron, they all have an immigration office that they've dealt with for their visas. They should go make an appointment there. They have lawyers on campus who could advise them. So that would be really important to them.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And if anyone's an immigration lawyer, I can tell you the whole pathway. Feel free, I'll give you the floor.
Please join me